Hello everybody and welcome back to the Not Applicable Formula 1 channel. After the Miami Grand Prix, let's not hang around too much and get straight into talking my 3 winners and 3 losers from this weekend. I know that it's a little bit cliche, but they did come away with a 1-2 this weekend, so Red Bull are going to go down as my first winners from the Miami Grand Prix. Let's start with Max Verstappen, who in the words of LL Cool J looked unstoppable, which didn't look like it was going to be the case, to be fair, as again it felt like Max Verstappen, as he was in Baku, was just full of complaints. Like this time it wasn't about the sprint format or about George Russell, but it was about the hands device that kept getting caught in his headrest. Although having said that, Max Verstappen was still the obvious favourite for pole position and then victory in Miami, but an error approaching turn 7 on his first run in Q3 led him to aborting that lap. Now that should have been fine, as even without a banker lap, the two-time world champion would have definitely backed himself to put in a good lap on his final run. Charles Leclerc though had different ideas, and we'll talk about his weekend a little bit more later. Crashed, brought out the red flag, denying Max Verstappen a second attempt, meaning that Max was forced to start the race on Sunday from 9th place. Because of that, Max Verstappen decided to go to the alternative strategy by starting on the hard compound tyre, which actually turned out to be the optimal strategy. It took him just 15 laps to reach Fernando Alonso and pass him for second place, and then it was all about managing tyre deg and the pace, and that first stint was managed exceptionally well by him, which meant he was then closer to Sergio Perez after his pit stop than he anticipated, making that pass for victory look incredibly easy on a fresh set of mediums to Sergio Perez's hard compound tyre. And talking of Sergio Perez, he didn't have a bad weekend either once he found his setup. He described it as his worst weekend up until qualifying, as he struggled to find a consistent balance for that Red Bull car, but he was miles off Max Verstappen's pace in practice and qualifying up until that Q3, where he was just basically gifted pole position. He kept the lead for a while, but as I mentioned before, it was inevitable that Perez was going to lose the lead to Verstappen when he switched onto those medium tyres. Despite doing his best to defend, he just wasn't quite up to the level of Max Verstappen this weekend, but he's a Mexican multiple race winner and is still gunning for the title this year. Loser number 1, and I think this is the first time an Aston has been in this category this year, Lance Stroll, the Canadian, carrying the hopes of his nation, finishing outside of the points, while his teammate was on the podium again. Stroll's weekend, to be fair to him, went wrong due to just one misjudgment by the team during qualifying, and then it spilled over into the race and kind of ruined the whole thing. Aston Martin opted to stick with their plan by getting both drivers through into Q2 on just one set of tyres, despite the fact that Lance Stroll's first run time wasn't great and the track was evolving massively as qualifying progressed. The Canadian wasn't able to pull a good enough lap time out of the bag, and that left Stroll down in 18th place for the race. I guess from that position you could argue that Stroll did a decent job in the race, but the real problem he encountered was being stuck in that DRS train really early on in the Grand Prix, where he was able to make an impressive pass on Joe, but had to wait for the second stint to overtake the likes of Hülkenberg, Albon, Bottas, on his way to a 12th place finish behind Tsunoda. It's just a shame because Alonso was able to make it through Q1 on one set of tyres, and then in Q3 was able to place himself second on the grid. Okay, Verstappen was always going to catch him and pass him during the Grand Prix, but he won the battle against Sainz by repassing him after being undercut. He also made sure that Russell didn't get close enough to threaten his position, and then picked up a 4th third place in 5 races. Alonso, showing what that Aston Martin car is truly capable of, just makes Lance's weekend look worse and worse. My second winners, and it pains me to say it, it's Alpine, as they come away from Miami with a double points finish to McLaren's 0 points.
I was a little upset.
Pierre Gasly was back to his best after the collision in Australia ruined what looked set to be an incredible drive, and a weekend of frustrations in Azerbaijan. He finally looked back to being confident in that car, and in qualifying he put in what he described as a strong lap in Q3 on those used softs to pick up 5th place. Had he been on a fresh set of softs, maybe he could have come away from that session beating Kevin Magnussen to 4th place, but the red flag awarded him a 3rd row start for the Grand Prix. For Gasly in the race, he couldn't really get away from the fact that the Alpine was the 5th quickest car. Like, he's behind the Red Bulls, Aston Martins, Ferraris and Mercedes, and he drove well under those conditions, not really putting up too much of a fight as those faster cars went past though, but you could argue he's not really racing them at the moment, and had he lost time in those battles, he may not have finished ahead of his teammate Esteban Ocon. Because Ocon, childhood friend turned rival turned teammate, had a pretty good race too. Esteban went for the inverse strategy to his teammate, starting on the hard compound tyre, going really long on that first stint. He started in 8th, but off the line he lost places to Bottas due to a little bit of wheel spin, before then losing another position to Max Verstappen later on in the first lap, which you can't really argue with. The Red Bull was an absolute rocket this weekend. He did manage to get back ahead of Bottas in that first stint, and then from there it was a pretty clean race for Esteban Ocon. He slotted in behind his teammate, earned Alpine another couple of points. Not too bad at all. My second loser from this weekend, and it has to be the Monaco man himself, Charles Leclerc. Just as the season looked like it was going to start rolling for Leclerc with a podium performance in Baku, the Ferrari driver came crashing back down to earth in Miami.
Nope, I see what I did there.
There is part of me that feels for Charles Leclerc, as once again he showed he's capable of some serious pace in Miami in that Ferrari car, but the errors are just so silly. He came out after the Grand Prix and he said he was running a very aggressive setup on the car, which was always teetering on the limit. The problem was he managed to overstep that limit, first on Friday in turn 7, and then again on Saturday, Leclerc took too much curb in turn 6, bottomed out the car, and spun into the barriers at turn 7 in an almost identical incident. He even said himself there was potential to do great today, and I put it all in the bin. That meant starting the Grand Prix from 7th place, where Leclerc made little progress during the race, to be honest with you, battling with Kevin Magnussen early on, which was very entertaining, but not really the position you want to be in when you're supposed to be one of the top 4 cars on the grid. When the Ferrari-powered Haas is causing problems for the Works team, you know you're not having a great weekend, although he did eventually manage to get past the Dane in the second stint. Having said that though, the second stint didn't really go to plan either. Tyre troubles, along with the inconsistency of a very wind-sensitive Ferrari car, made it very difficult for Charles Leclerc to really find a rhythm, and then he lost 6th place to Lewis Hamilton in the closing stages of the Grand Prix, as the Brit was on the reverse strategy, and Charles could do absolutely nothing as the Mercedes flew by on a fresh set of medium tyres. Because Carlos Sainz also lost out to George Russell, that meant that the Mercedes team came away with 20 points from Miami, whereas Ferrari only took home 16 points. Actually, only one more point than Aston Martin, who only had Fernando Alonso picking up 15 points on the podium. It's definitely back to the drawing board again for the team in red in their quest to be the second fastest team on the grid. Which leads me on quite nicely to what may be a bit of a weird shout, but I'm going to put Mercedes as my final winners from the weekend, although it's definitely a damage limitations winner, as they were even further from the Red Bull's pace than they normally are, and both drivers had a pretty weird weekend with tricky parts throughout, but they came away, as I said, with the most points in that battle for second place in the Constructors. Given just how slow that Mercedes was in qualifying trim, Russell absolutely maximised everything to qualify in 6th place. Yes, luck played a huge part in qualifying so high, but he made the most of it and drove an excellent race from there, overtaking Gasly during his first stint, and then catching and passing Carlos Sainz in the later stages of the race, even though the Spaniard had a 5-second penalty that they could have capitalised on. It's fair to say that Lewis Hamilton had a little bit more to do over the course of the Grand Prix though, mainly because he fell victim to traffic in Q2 and dropped out of qualifying in 13th place. Luckily for him, the Mercedes had much stronger pace in the race, and after surviving a brush with Nico Hülkenberg through turn 2 on the opening lap, he spent the first 14-15 laps stuck behind Alex Albon in a DRS train, just biding his time on the hard tyres. Once he had some clear air in front of him though, he put the pace of the car to good use, putting in some incredible laps and putting himself in 9th place after he pitted for the medium tyres, then passing Magnussen, Leclerc and Gasly to take 6th place overall. If you look at it overall though, Russell and Hamilton were on a pretty similar level throughout the weekend, with obviously qualifying being the major difference maker, but Russell beat out his Ferrari and Carlos Sainz, and Hamilton beat out his target Ferrari and Leclerc, so overall they saved what could have been a terrible weekend. My final losers from this weekend are the rookies. I'm going to group them all together because Oscar, Nick and Logan all had terrible races running around at the back of the pack. Piastri, Australia's rookie boy wonder, can definitely feel the most hard done by here, as he didn't really do too much wrong, but was very unlucky again with McLaren's reliability, as he was in Bahrain. The race ended up being a very long and difficult one, considering he had a good start, making up positions after starting in 19th place, and then just about as he was getting into the swing of things, he had a brake-by-wire problem that arose, and as he put it, I had a brake pedal that felt like it was about 2 meters long, meaning that he fell all the way back to where he started in 19th place. Nick de Vries is under a lot of pressure at the moment, and this weekend will not have helped even slightly. He did a great job to reach Q2 and out-qualify his teammate in Yuki Tsunoda, but then came the race, and any positives he had from qualifying disappeared at the race start. Lando Norris had a really good getaway in the McLaren and got ahead, but that was met by Nick de Vries locking up under braking for turn 1 and rear-ending the McLaren off the track. Although neither of the drivers did pick up any terminal damage, the race was basically over for the both of them from that point. Finally, Logan Sargent was last in qualifying and last in the race, which is definitely not what he would have wanted coming into his first ever home Grand Prix. In qualifying, he felt like he had the pace to get into Q2, but failed to nail that lap in Q1, and that just cost him overall, really, because any chance of improvement in the race vanished when he clipped Lance Stroll in the chicane on the first lap. He was then forced to come in for an incredibly long early stop for a new front wing and a fresh set of hard tyres, which he would then be on until the end of the Grand Prix. Luckily for him, he has 2 more American races to make up for it later on in the season. Some quick honourable mentions. Kevin Magnussen comes away from the weekend as a winner for me. He outqualified Nico Hülkenberg for the first time in 2023, starting in P4 and converted that into a points finish. He may be small in stature, but he was absolutely mighty with another P11 finish for Yuki Tsunoda and another win for the Japanese driver. Albon could have also been a winner here as he continued his strong 2023 form by massively outperforming the expectations of the Williams team in qualifying and then having a so-so race. Nico Hülkenberg could have definitely gone down as a loser, as although it was his first time driving the Miami Grand Prix circuit, hitting the wall in FP1 is definitely not the way you want to start your weekend. And McLaren are so lucky that I didn't put them down as a loser, considering their weekend was absolutely appalling from start to finish. Overall, it was a much better race weekend than in Baku last time out, but the Red Bull cars look even more unstoppable now than they did 2 or 3 races ago.
That was incredibly fast.
I suppose we just all have to have eyes on Spain, where the upgrades for most of the teams will come, to see if anyone can actually get anywhere close. Let me know your winners and losers though down in the comments below. Whilst you're down there, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you next time.